I came home from Europe 4 days earlier than planned, without telling anyone. I wanted to surprise my daughter and granddaughter with the gifts I had brought back. But the moment I stepped into the yard, my daughter didn't smile. She grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt and whispered, "Dad, hide. My husband is setting you up." Before I could ask what she meant, she shoved a USB drive into my hand. Then she looked toward the house and began trembling. I had no idea that everything I had built over a lifetime was about to be destroyed using my own name. Before we go any further, thank you for being here on Dad Family Revenge. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your state, your country. I read every single one. It means more than you know. A note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside is something worth carrying. I almost didn't come home early. That was the thought that kept circling through my mind as the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, the Pacific coastline stretching gold and hazy beneath a late afternoon sun. I had 3 more days in Europe. 3 perfectly good days, a cooking class in Florence. I had already paid for a walking tour of the Cinque Terre coastline, and one final evening at a small wine bar in Genoa, where the owner had promised to open a bottle he'd been saving since 1987. I gave all of it up because I missed my daughter. That's the kind of father I had become in retirement, the kind who books spontaneous flights home and buys too many gifts at airport shops. For 38 years, I had been the other kind. The kind who missed school plays because of deadlines, who called from job sites on birthdays, who always had one more project, one more contract, one more reason to be somewhere other than home. My wife, Margaret, had never complained. Not once, not out loud. But I remembered the way she used to look at me sometimes across the dinner table when Emily was small, a look that said everything she was too gracious to say. She passed 4 years ago. And after the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming, and the house on Rose Hill went quiet in a way I had never noticed before, I finally understood what that look had meant. So I booked the early flight. I bought the blue knit dress for Emily from a boutique in Prague's Old Town, the stuffed bear for my granddaughter Sophie from a toy shop near the Charles Bridge, and a small wooden box containing a French pocket watch I found at a weekend market, delicate, gold-faced, still keeping perfect time after what the vendor claimed were 60 years. I imagined Emily's face when she opened the door, that surprised, warm smile she had inherited from her mother. Sophie running across the hardwood floor and her socks arms already open before she reached me. I was still imagining it when I turned onto her street in Arcadia. The neighborhood was the kind that real estate listings called established wide lawns, mature oaks, houses with wide front porches, and basketball hoops in the driveways. Emily and Ryan had bought the house 2 years into their marriage. I had helped with the down payment. I remembered feeling proud of that at the time. I parked a block away under the shade of a large oak tree, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment with the gift bag on the passenger seat beside me. The late afternoon light was long and amber across the lawns. A sprinkler ran in the yard 2 houses down. Somewhere a dog barked twice and went quiet. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. I grabbed the gift bag, stepped out of the rental car, and walked the remaining distance on foot. She came from the side of the house, not through the front door, the way I had imagined, but from the narrow path that ran between the garage and the fence line, her hair loose and tangled as though she hadn't brushed it since morning. She was wearing a gray cardigan, despite the warmth of the afternoon, the sleeves pulled down over her wrists, and when she saw me, she didn't smile. She ran. Not toward me the way Sophie ran, arms open, face bright. She ran the way people run when something's chasing them. Her sneakers slapped against the concrete. Her breath already ragged when she reached me, and she grabbed both of my arms with both of her hands, and her fingers were trembling so badly I could feel it through my jacket sleeve. Dad. Her voice was barely above a whisper, cracked at the edges, her eyes darting over my shoulder toward the street. Dad, you have to leave. Right now. My heart lurched sideways in my chest. Emily, sweetheart, what? There's no time. She was already pulling me toward the side path, her grip surprisingly strong for someone whose hands were shaking that hard. Ryan's coming back. He'll be here in 10 minutes, maybe less. She reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and pressed something small and cold into my palm, closing my fingers around it before I could look down. Don't go home. Don't call me on this number. Just go. Emily. I caught her by the shoulders, steadying her. Up close, I could see that her left cheek was swollen along the cheekbone, not dramatically, not the kind of thing a stranger would necessarily notice. But I was her father. I had watched that face since the morning she was born. I knew every line of it. What happened to your face? Her eyes filled instantly, the tears right there at the surface, as though they had been waiting all day. Please, Dad. Please just trust me right now. I will explain everything, I promise, but you have to go before he... The sound of a truck engine cut through the afternoon. Emily's whole body went rigid. She grabbed my arm and pulled me hard toward the fence, toward the narrow gap between the garage and the wooden slats, and I went. Not because I understood what was happening, but because the look on my daughter's face told me that arguing was a luxury neither of us could afford right now. I pressed myself against the garage wall. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. Through a gap in the fence slats, I could see the driveway, and I watched Ryan's black pickup truck swing in from the street and roll to a stop. He stepped out slowly, the way confident men do, no hurry, one hand resting on the roof of the truck as he scanned the yard. He was wearing a dark work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and there was something in his posture, some quality of ownership, in the way he stood there looking at the house that I had never noticed before. Or perhaps I had noticed and told myself it was something else. Emily stepped into view from the side path. Her chin was up. Her hands, I could see, were pressed flat against her thighs, the only thing betraying what was happening beneath the surface. "You're home early," she said. Her voice was steady. I didn't know how she made it steady. Ryan tilted his head. "What are you doing out here?" "Just getting some air," she said. Her voice was steady. I didn't know how she made it steady. He studied her for a moment, with an expression I couldn't fully read from where I stood, not anger, exactly, more like a man running a quiet calculation. Then he walked toward her, closed the distance in 3 unhurried strides, and said something low enough that I couldn't make out the words. Whatever it was, it made Emily take one small step backward. My hand found the fence post. My knuckles went white around it. Every instinct I had, every protective, furious, terrified thing in me surged up toward the surface, and I nearly pushed through that gap in the fence right then and there. But Emily turned her head. Not far, just a few degrees, just enough to look toward the gap between the garage and the fence where she knew I was standing. And she shook her head. Once. Small. Deliberate. The look on her face wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for me. Ryan put his hand on her arm and guided her toward the front door. She went. The door closed behind them. The sprinkler continued to run on the lawn 2 houses down. I stood against the warm garage wall with something small and cold clenched in my fist, and my heart hammering against my ribs, like it was trying to get out. And I understood for the first time, with the particular clarity that only comes when it is far too late, that whatever had been happening inside that house had been happening for a very long time. And I had not been here to see it. I opened my hand. In my palm was a small USB drive no bigger than my thumb, with a piece of white adhesive tape along one side. Written on the tape in Emily's handwriting were 4 words. "Don't come inside." Read. Darlene Hutchins had lived across the street from Emily for 11 years. She was 70 years old, sharp-eyed, and moved with the deliberate energy of a woman who had outlasted 2 husbands, 1 house fire, and a homeowners association that had tried to fine her for her rose bushes. When she opened the door and found me standing on her porch in the gathering dark, still in my travel clothes, gift bag dangling from one hand, and a USB drive clenched in the other, she didn't gasp. She didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside, held the door open, and said, "I've been waiting for someone to come home." Those words hit me somewhere behind the sternum. Not because they were dramatic, because they were calm. The kind of calm that only comes from someone who has been carrying a worry for a very long time. She locked the deadbolt behind me, pulled the curtains across the front window, and set her laptop on the kitchen table without being asked. Her kitchen smelled of coffee and something sweet, banana bread maybe, and the ordinariness of it made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. "How long?" I asked, sliding the USB into her laptop. 6 months of being certain. She poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if I wanted one and set them both on the table. Another 4 of having a feeling I couldn't prove. The drive loaded. 3 folders. I opened the first one. The video was shot through a narrow gap, a closet door maybe, or a cracked bedroom door, and the angle was low and slightly tilted. But the image was clear enough. Ryan and 2 men I didn't recognize were carrying wooden crates down the stairs into my basement. My house. The house on Rose Hill that Margaret and I had bought in 1991, where Emily had grown up, where I still kept her 3rd grade spelling trophy on the bookshelf because I could never bring myself to pack it away. My hand tightened around the coffee mug until my knuckles ached. The second video showed Ryan alone opening one of the crates. He lifted out a small bronze figurine, turned it over in his hands, and set it carefully on my workbench, beside a row of similar objects. A mantel clock with an ornate brass face, a pair of silver candlesticks, a pocket watch in a velvet case. Every single item had a small white tag attached, the kind museums use. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. The second folder held documents, purchase agreements, certificates of provenance, wire transfer confirmations. My name was on every single page, Daniel R. Brooks, in a signature that made my throat close up because it looked exactly like mine. Same forward slant, same open loop on the capital B, same quick upward stroke at the end. "He copied your signature," Darlene said quietly, watching my face. "Or traced it from something. I don't know which." "How do you have this?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Emily." Darlene wrapped both hands around her own mug, and I noticed that her knuckles were white too. "She's been collecting it for months, piece by piece whenever he wasn't watching. She brought me the drive 3 weeks ago. Said if anything happened to her, I should keep it safe." The air went out of my lungs like I'd been hit. If anything happened to her. My daughter had been living inside that sentence for months, planning for the possibility that something might happen to her. And I had been in Florence eating pasta and shopping for pocket watches. I opened the 3rd folder, an audio file. I pressed play. Emily's voice filled the kitchen, low and fast, the words tumbling over each other, the way they did when she was frightened, the way they had when she was 7 years old and called me from a sleepover because she'd had a nightmare and wanted to come home. "Dad, if you're hearing this, it means I found a way to get it to you. Ryan has been using your name for almost a year. He knows you collect antiques, everyone knows, so nobody questioned the paperwork. He's been storing stolen property in your basement and building a paper trail that says you bought all of it. When you come home, he's going to call the police, anonymously. They'll search the house and they'll find everything, and it will all have your name on it. Dad, please don't come straight home. Please don't confront him. Please, just please be smarter than I was. I love you." The recording ended. I stared at the laptop screen for a long moment, my jaw clenched so tight my back teeth ached. Then I looked up at Darlene, and my voice, when it finally came, was the steadiest it had been all evening, because something had shifted inside me, some gear clicking into place with a quiet, final precision I recognized from 40 years of engineering work. It was the feeling of understanding exactly what needed to be done. "How much of this does he know you have?" Darlene met my eyes without flinching. "Not a single piece of it." "Good," I said. "Then we still have time." I sat in Darlene's kitchen for 3 full minutes before I picked up my phone. Not because I didn't know what to do. I knew exactly what to do. I had known from the moment Emily's recorded voice stopped playing and the kitchen went quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. I needed Ryan to believe that nothing had changed. The problem was that every nerve in my body was screaming. My hands wanted to shake. My voice wanted to crack. 40 years of building things had given me a high tolerance for pressure. But this was a different kind of pressure entirely. The kind that came from knowing your daughter had been living inside a nightmare for nearly a year while you were touring wine country and haggling over antique pocket watches. I pressed the heels of my palms flat against the kitchen table and breathed. Once, twice. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. Ryan answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad." Warm, easy, the voice of a man without a single thing on his conscience. "I thought you weren't back until Saturday. Change of plans," I said. I kept my voice tired, slightly distracted, the voice of a man who had just spent 11 hours in economy class and was running on airport coffee and stale pretzels. The last few days didn't pan out the way I hoped. Decided to cut it short. "Oh, that's too bad." A beat of what sounded like genuine sympathy. The man was good. I had to give him that. "Where are you now? You need a ride." "Already grabbed a rental. I'm going to check into a hotel tonight. I'm too wiped out to deal with the house." I paused, letting the fatigue seep into my words. "Thought I'd call and let you know I was back. Maybe come by for dinner tomorrow if that works." "Are you kidding? Emily will be thrilled." His voice brightened in a way that made my jaw tighten. "She's been missing you like crazy. And actually good timing, Dad. I've been wanting to talk to you about your collection. Got some ideas I think you're really going to like." There it was. Not "how was the trip?" or "glad you made it back safe." Within 40 seconds, he had steered the conversation to my collection. The collection he had spent 10 months turning into a weapon pointed directly at me. "Sounds interesting," I said, and I was genuinely proud of how level my voice came out. "We can talk tomorrow." "Perfect. Get some rest. We'll see you at 7. The call ended. I set the phone face down on the table and pressed both fists against my mouth and sat there for a moment, with my eyes closed, because if I didn't do something physical with the anger that was moving through me, I was going to put my hand through Darlene's kitchen wall, and that wasn't going to help anyone. "Well?" Darlene asked from across the table. She had both hands wrapped around her coffee cup, and her eyes were sharp and steady on my face. "He thinks I just landed," I said. "He invited me to dinner tomorrow." "And you said yes." "Of course I said yes." Darlene studied me for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but close. "You're going to handle this quietly, aren't you? Not the way most fathers would." I looked down at the USB drive still sitting beside the laptop. I thought about the bronze figurines with their museum tags. I thought about the documents bearing my signature, my name, my reputation. 60 years of an honest life, all of it quietly, methodically, turned into a trap. "Ryan made one mistake," I said. "What's that?" "He planned this whole thing around the idea that I'd come home Saturday and walk straight into it." I picked up the USB drive and closed my fingers around it. He didn't plan for 4 days early. Darlene set down her coffee cup with a small, definitive click. So what do you do with 4 days? I stood up from the table, slid the USB into my jacket pocket, and reached for my phone to find the number I needed. A number I hadn't dialed in almost 2 years, belonging to a man who had spent 3 decades finding things that other people thought were well hidden. I build something better than what he built, I said, and I make sure it holds. I had owned the house on Rose Hill for 33 years. I knew every creak of its floorboards, every draft that came through the kitchen window in January, every place where the morning light landed at a particular angle that Margaret had loved. I had poured the back patio slab myself on a weekend in 1994. With my brother-in-law and 2 cases of beer, I had painted every room at least twice. I had replaced the water heater, the furnace, the roof, the gutters, and the front porch railing, all with my own hands, because I was an engineer, and engineers fix things themselves. I knew this house the way I knew my own skeleton. Which is why, when I pulled the rental car into the driveway on Wednesday morning and walked through the front door, I felt the wrongness immediately, not dramatically, not like something from a movie, but as a quiet, specific unease. The kind that comes from knowing a place so well that a single displaced detail registers like a wrong note in a song you've heard 1,000 times. The door lock was new, same brand, same finish, but the keyway was slightly different, and the deadbolt threw with a resistance I didn't recognize. I stood in the entryway for a moment, my travel bag at my feet, and listened to the house. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. The coat rack, the side table, Margaret's watercolor of the San Gabriel Mountains hanging in the hallway, the stack of unread mail I'd asked my neighbor Ted to collect. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the mail. 3 weeks of utility bills, a catalog from a tool supplier, a jury summons that I would need to deal with later. I read every piece slowly, my eyes moving across the words, while my mind stayed very still and very focused, the way it used to on job sites when something in a structure wasn't adding up. Then I went downstairs. The basement looked right at first glance. My workbench along the left wall, the shelving units with their labeled bins of hardware, the climate-controlled cabinet where I kept the more delicate pieces of my collection. The overhead fluorescent light flickered once when I pulled the cord the way it always had. But at the far end of the room, where there had always been open floor space leading to the utility corner, there was now a wall. Wooden framing drywall panels painted to match the existing walls with impressive care. Someone had taken real time with it. Real skill. If I hadn't known that wall hadn't been there 3 weeks ago, I might have believed it had always been there. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at it for a long moment. My hands wanted to reach out and touch it, to press against the drywall the way I would on any job site to feel what was behind it. But I didn't move. Because Ryan was careful, and careful men sometimes installed cameras, and I was not going to give him the satisfaction of watching me discover what he had hidden. I went back upstairs, washed my coffee cup, and called Frank Delgado. Frank had spent 22 years with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department before retiring to open a private investigations firm on Marengo Avenue in downtown Pasadena. He specialized in stolen property cases, art jewelry antiques, the kind of high-value items that moved through a shadow economy most people didn't know existed. We had met 15 years ago when he'd tracked down a set of antique surveying instruments stolen from a colleague of mine, and we had stayed in loose contact ever since. He was 61 years old, built like a man who had once been athletic and had made peace with no longer being so, and he had a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being filed away in a system you couldn't see. He met me at his office at 2 in the afternoon. I put the USB drive on his desk without a preamble. He watched the videos without a word, his expression neutral and unreadable. When the third file finished playing the audio of Emily's recorded message, He sat back in his chair and pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "The man carrying the crates with your son-in-law," he said finally. "The shorter one, the dark jacket. What about him?" Frank turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was a photograph, a surveillance image, grainy but clear enough. The same man. Same build, same way of holding his shoulders. "His name is Victor Hale," Frank said. "I've been watching him for 4 years. He moves stolen property, high-end antiques, museum-grade pieces, through private collectors who don't ask questions. He's never been convicted because he's never the one doing the stealing." Frank paused, and when he looked at me, his eyes were serious, in a way that made my chest tighten. "Daniel, if Victor Hale is involved in this, what's in your basement is not a small operation." "How bad?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Frank pulled up another screen. A list of reported thefts, San Diego, Santa Barbara, Pasadena itself. Dates stretching back 18 months. "Bad enough, Ja," he said, "that we need to be very, very careful about what we do next." Frank pulled up 3 separate databases on his monitor: law enforcement theft, registries, insurance claim records, and a private network he had built over 20 years of working recovered property cases. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, and I sat across the desk from him and watched the pieces fall into place one by one like a structure revealing its own flaws under load. The bronze figurine from Ryan's video stolen from a private residence in La Jolla 14 months ago. Reported value $84,000. The mantel clock with the brass face taken from an estate sale in Santa Barbara that turned out not to have been an estate sale at all. Reported value $61,000. The pocket watch in the velvet case, this one made my stomach turn over completely because it had come from the Pasadena Museum of History. Taken during a facilities renovation 8 months ago when security had been temporarily reduced. 3 blocks from my house. 3 blocks. Frank leaned back and crossed his arms. "You want the total? Tell me. What we can positively identify from the video footage alone, just the pieces we can see clearly enough to match against theft reports, comes to approximately $3.2 million. He said it the way doctors deliver bad diagnoses. Straight, no cushioning. And that's only what's visible in the footage Emily recorded. There's no way to know what else is behind that wall." The number sat in the air between us like something with physical weight. $3.2 million. In my basement, with my name on every piece of paper saying I had bought it. "There's something else," Frank said. He pulled up a new screen. Banking records flagged transactions. "I have a contact at a financial crimes unit who owed me a favor. I called him this morning while you were driving over." He turned the monitor toward me. "Someone opened a checking account 14 months ago using your social security number, your date of birth, and a copy of your driver's license. The account has processed over $200,000 in transactions, payments to freight companies, storage facilities, document services." I stared at the screen. My social security number. The 9 digits I had memorized at 17 years old and never written down anywhere because my father had told me to keep it in my head and nowhere else. "Under California law," Frank said, "what Ryan has done constitutes identity theft, a felony under Penal Code 530.5. Combined with the federal statute Title 18 of the U.S. Code Section 1028, he's looking at serious prison time if this goes the right way." He paused. "The problem is that right now all of this evidence points at you just as convincingly as it points at him. Every transaction from that account carries your name. Every document in your basement has your signature. If law enforcement walks through your front door today, you are the one they arrest." My hands were flat on the desk in front of me. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "He used the trip," I said. Frank nodded slowly. Every transaction that account made while you were in Europe has a clean alibi built into it. You were out of the country. You had opportunity to meet with overseas suppliers. Your passport stamps would look like evidence against you, not for you. I thought about the cooking class in Florence I had given up, the wine bar in Genoa, the extra 3 days I had decided on a whim that I didn't need. He didn't plan for me to come home early, I said. No, Frank agreed. He didn't. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his voice dropping slightly. Daniel, we have 4 days before Saturday. Before the day he expected you to walk through your front door and find the police already waiting. He met my eyes and held them. What do you want to do with 4 days? I thought about Emily's voice on that recording. Please be smarter than I was. I want to build a case that doesn't leave him a single way out, I said. Every exit sealed, every angle covered. Frank studied me for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad. Then we start tonight, he said. Talk me through everything from the beginning. Emily had set the table with the good dishes. That was the first thing I noticed when Ryan led me through the front door, with a hand on my shoulder and a smile that belonged on a campaign poster. The good dishes, white with a thin blue border, a wedding gift from Margaret's sister that Emily had inherited and always saved for occasions that felt like they deserved something better than everyday ceramics. She had lit candles. She had put a small vase of yellow flowers on the table. She was trying so hard to make this look normal that my heart cracked straight down the middle. Dad. She came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel, and when she hugged me, she held on for exactly 1 second longer than she usually did. 1 second. I felt it like a current running through the contact point between us, a message passed, the only way she could safely pass it. Her hair smelled like the same shampoo she had used since college, and I had to work extremely hard not to tighten my arms around her and refuse to let go. You look tired, she said, pulling back, searching my face with those careful eyes. Long flight, I said, which was true, and also the least important thing happening in that room. Ryan poured wine without asking what anyone wanted, a heavy Cabernet, the expensive kind he brought out when he wanted to seem generous. He talked about a construction project he was managing in Glendale, about the neighbor's new truck, about the price of lumber. He was relaxed and fluid and completely in command of the room, and watching him perform his ordinary husband routine made something cold and precise settle into place behind my sternum. This man had spent 10 months dismantling my life, and he sat here cutting his chicken and talking about lumber prices. How was Prague? He asked, refilling my glass without being asked. Beautiful, I said. I found some interesting pieces at a weekend market. Ryan's eyebrows lifted with what looked like genuine curiosity. Anything good? A few things. I cut a piece of bread and kept my voice casual, the way you do when what you're saying doesn't matter at all. There was a French pocket watch from the 1880s, remarkably good condition. Dealer said it was from a private estate in Lyon. I looked up and met Ryan's eyes across the table. I'll probably need to update my insurance documentation when I get it appraised. Add it to the existing file. Something moved across his face. Gone in less than a second, a tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible stillness in the hand holding his wineglass. If I hadn't spent 40 years reading structural stress in materials that didn't want to show their weaknesses, I might have missed it entirely. But I was an engineer. I had built my career on finding the things that didn't want to be found. Ryan recovered smoothly. Smart thinking, he said. You can never be too careful with documentation. No, I agreed. You really can't. Emily reached across the table for the bread basket, and her hand passed within an inch of mine, and she did something so small and so deliberate that I almost stopped breathing. She let her fingertips rest against the back of my hand for less than 2 seconds. A touch so brief that Ryan, refilling his own glass and reaching for his phone to silence a notification, didn't register it at all. But I felt it the way you feel, the first crack in a foundation, small, almost nothing, but telling you everything about what the structure has been holding. She was still in there. My daughter, behind everything Ryan had built around her, she was still in there, still fighting, in the only way she currently could. And she was telling me she knew I understood. I closed my fingers gently around hers for the same 2 seconds. Then we both let go. Ryan looked up from his phone. "More wine, Dad." "Just water, thanks," I said. "I want to keep a clear head." He laughed like that was a perfectly ordinary thing to say. It was, just not for the reason he thought. The text came in at 10:14 Thursday morning from a number I didn't recognize. Vaughn's on Huntington. Parking lot. 20 minutes. Please. That last word, please, was what told me it was Emily. She never said please in text messages. It was a running joke between us, had been since she was a teenager. She said it out loud, constantly. Said it face to face with the kind of easy sincerity her mother had also had. But in writing, she always dropped it. Too formal, she used to say. Texts are supposed to sound like talking. The please meant she was frightened enough to forget herself. I was in Frank's office when it came through. I showed him the screen without a word, grabbed my keys, and was in the rental car before he could finish telling me to be careful. She was pushing a shopping cart along the outer edge of the parking lot when I pulled in, moving slowly, head down the cart, half full of things she probably didn't need. She was wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and a long-sleeved shirt despite the fact that it was 68 degrees and warming. I parked at the far end near the cart return and walked toward her at a pace that wouldn't draw attention. When she saw me coming, she stopped the cart and gripped the handle with both hands, and I watched her knuckles go white from 15 feet away. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice light, like we had simply run into each other. I leaned in and kissed her cheek the way fathers do in parking lots. Against her ear, I said very quietly, "Are you being watched right now?" "I don't think so." Her voice was barely audible. "He thinks I'm at the pharmacy." I straightened up and looked at her properly, and that was when I saw her wrists. She had pushed her sleeves up slightly when she gripped the cart handle just enough. The bruising ran from her wrist bone up toward her forearm, dark purple fading to green at the edges, the kind of coloring that meant it was several days old. Not from yesterday. Not from the day I had arrived. This had been there healing and reforming for longer than I wanted to calculate. Something rose up in my chest that I had no clean word for. It wasn't anger exactly, though anger was part of it. It was something older and more fundamental, the specific devastation of a parent who understands all at once the full distance between what they knew and what was actually true. "Emily," my voice came out rough despite everything. "Don't," she said quickly, her jaw tightening behind the sunglasses. "Don't do the face, Dad. I need you to hold it together right now because I'm barely holding it together self, and if you fall apart, I'm going to fall apart, and we can't do that here." I swallowed everything back down. "Okay," I said. "Okay, talk to me." She told me quickly, her eyes moving to the street every few seconds. Ryan had taken her bank card 4 months ago, changed the PIN without telling her, and handed it back like he was doing her a favor, managing things, simplifying. Her phone had parental controls installed on it, the kind that logged every call and message. There was a GPS tracker on her car, a small magnetic unit clipped to the undercarriage. She had found it by accident when she dropped her keys and crouched to pick them up. "Every time I asked about the boxes," she said, and her voice dropped even further, "he would remind me what would happen to you. He'd say it very calmly, like he was discussing the weather." Her chin trembled for a moment, and she pressed her lips together hard until it stopped. "I kept thinking someone would notice." Darlene noticed, but she didn't know enough. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know who Ryan might know. You did the right thing waiting for me, I said. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pressed something into my palm, a small key, the kind used for padlocks with a numbered tag attached. I took it from his jacket 2 nights ago, she whispered. Unit 417, South El Monte. I don't know exactly what's there, but I heard him on the phone telling someone the transfer was almost ready. I closed my fingers around the key. Then I did something I had decided to do before I left Frank's office. I reached into my own jacket pocket and took out the small white AirTag I had asked Frank to pick up that morning, flat circular about the size of a large shirt button. While I took Emily's hand in both of mine, squeezing gently, I pressed the AirTag into the interior lining of her bag through the small gap where the seam had partially separated near the bottom corner. She frowned slightly, feeling the motion. "What are you—" "Insurance," I said quietly, "in case I ever need to find you in a hurry." Her face did something complicated. Then the sunglasses hid her eyes, but her mouth went through about 4 different emotions in the space of 2 seconds, and when she spoke again, her voice had a crack running straight through the middle of it. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was so sure that if you came in angry and unprepared, he would win, and I couldn't let him win. Not when it was your name on everything." I brought her hand up and held it carefully, mindful of the bruising. "Listen to me. None of this is your fault. You held this together alone for almost a year, and you did it to protect me." My throat tightened around the last few words, but I pushed through them. "That stops now. You understand, you are not alone in this anymore." She nodded, and behind the sunglasses, I could see the shine of tears she was refusing to let fall. She squeezed my hand once hard, then let go and straightened up and adjusted her grip on the cart, like she was preparing to walk back into the life she had been surviving. "Go home," I said. "Act normal. Don't take any risks." "Dad." She was already turning the cart. "Be careful." "Always am," I said. She pushed the cart away toward the store entrance. I stood beside the cart return and watched her go, and kept my face completely neutral and my breathing completely even. And the moment she disappeared through the automatic doors, I turned away and pressed the back of my fist against my mouth and stood there for a long moment, with my eyes burning and my chest in ruins. Then I took a breath, then another. Then I got in the car and called Frank. "I have the key," I said. "Unit 417, South El Monte. I'll pull the facility records tonight," he said. "We start watching tomorrow." The first night, nothing happened. Frank and I parked on Durfee Avenue in 2 separate vehicles, his gray Tahoe and my rental 2 dull-colored cars, among the dozens of others that lined the industrial corridor running through South El Monte. The SoCal storage facility sat behind a chain-link fence with an automated gate, its rows of orange roll-up doors, visible from the street under the pale wash of security lighting. Unit 417 was in the second row from the back. We could see the door from where Frank had positioned the Tahoe at an angle that a traffic camera would read as simply another vehicle parked on a public street, which was exactly what it was. Frank had been meticulous about that. "Everything we record out here is from public space," he had explained before we left his office. "The street, the gate, the visible portions of the lot. Legally clean. No arguments later." We waited from 11 at night until 3 in the morning. A few trucks moved through the gate, a landscaping company picking up equipment, a moving van returning late, a man in a white pickup who spent 20 minutes in a unit near the front before driving away with 2 cardboard boxes. Nobody went near 417. I drank bad coffee from a gas station thermos and watched the facility and thought about Emily's wrists. The second night was the same for the first 3 hours. Frank dozed in the Tahoe. I stayed awake, which wasn't difficult, because every time I felt my eyes getting heavy, I thought about the purple bruising fading to green along my daughter's forearm, and that brought me back completely. At 1:53 in the morning, a black pickup truck turned off Durfee and rolled slowly toward the facility gate. I recognized it before the headlights swung across the gate panel. Ryan's truck. The same one I had watched pull into Emily's driveway 4 days ago. I pressed Frank's arm twice. He was awake instantly, the way people who have spent years doing surveillance wake up, not gradually, not with confusion, but all at once and completely. 2 more vehicles followed Ryan through the gate, a white cargo van and a dark green SUV. The cargo van parked near the second row. The SUV pulled around to the side where the security camera had the worst angle of detail that told me immediately these were not people making their first visit. Ryan stepped out of the truck. With him came 2 men. The first I recognized from Emily's video, Victor Hale moving with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to operating in the dark. The second was younger, maybe 30, broad across the shoulders, wearing a black hoodie with the hood down. He moved boxes the way people do when they've been paid to move boxes, and nothing more efficiently, without curiosity, without any particular investment in what he was carrying. "The second man," I said quietly to Frank. "Do you know him?" Frank had his camera up the long lens, tracking silently. "Not yet," he murmured, "but I will by morning." They worked for 40 minutes. Crates from the cargo van into Unit 417, methodical and fast. Frank recorded everything. License plates, faces, timestamps, the specific items he could identify through the lens. When they were done, Ryan locked the unit, said something to Victor that made Victor nod once, and they drove out separately, the SUV first, then the van, then Ryan's truck. We waited 20 minutes after the last vehicle left. Then Frank made a call. "I need to loop in Lena Marsh before we go any further," he said. "Deputy I've worked with for years. Straight smart, and she understands how evidence chains need to be handled." He looked at me over the roof of the car. "We do this right, Daniel. Everything goes through proper channels from here." "Agreed," I said. He made the call, gave her a 60-second summary, and she asked 3 sharp questions that told me immediately she was exactly what Frank had said she was. She agreed to meet us the following afternoon. With Lena's preliminary clearance established, Frank and I approached the facility on foot. The office light at the front of the property was still on through the window. I could see a woman at a desk, dark hair cut short, reading something on a monitor. A property manager working late or perhaps working overnight. I filed it away without giving it much thought. People kept strange hours in industrial areas. I used Emily's key. The unit smelled of cedar and machine oil, and something else underneath a faint chemical sweetness I recognized from conservation work, the kind of coating used on antique metals to slow oxidation. They were taking care of these pieces. That detail, for some reason, made me angrier than almost anything else had. Against the left wall, stacked in careful rows, were 14 crates of various sizes. On the workbench along the right wall sat a stack of manila folders beside a laptop and a portable label printer. I opened the top folder. The first page was a photograph of me. Not a candid, a proper photograph, the kind taken at a public event. I was standing at a display table at the Pasadena Antique Fair from 2 summers ago, smiling at something outside the frame, a pocket watch in my hand. Beneath it was a second photograph, me again at a different fair, examining a bracket clock. Then a third. 4, 5. The folder was labeled with 2 words at the top, printed in clean block letters. Brooks Collection. Behind the photographs were copies of my passport, my driver's license, and a printed itinerary of my European trip flights, hotels, city by city, annotated in handwriting I didn't recognize, with notes like opportunity for private acquisition and known dealer contact in Lyon. Ryan had taken my vacation and turned it into a criminal biography. My hands were trembling by the time I reached the last page. Not from fear. From the specific pressurized fury of a man who has just understood the full architecture of what has been built against him and is already in the back of his mind calculating exactly where to place the first load-bearing cut. "Frank," I said quietly. He was already looking. He had his camera out photographing each page without touching them. "I see it," he said. "There's a shipping schedule at the back." He turned to it. "Read it." Then he looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. In the years I'd known him, something between professional alarm and genuine anger. "Saturday," he said. "Everything in this unit transfers to your house on Saturday morning. And there's a note here," he pointed to the bottom of the PO, "about an anonymous call to LAPD Saturday afternoon, the day I was supposed to come home." "He thought of everything," I said. "Almost everything," Frank said. He lowered the camera and met my eyes. "He didn't think of you. Before I tell you what Daniel decided to do next, and trust me, it was not what anyone expected, drop a 9 in the comments right now so I know you're still with me. Because what happens in the next few days will change everything. Stay close." A reminder, this story contains fictional elements created for entertainment and reflection. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to step away, no hard feelings at all. Frank wanted to make the call at 7 in the morning. We were sitting in a diner on Valley Boulevard called Rosie's, the kind of place that had been serving the same breakfast menu since 1974, and saw no reason to change with laminated menus and coffee that came in thick ceramic mugs and a waitress named Carol, who refilled without being asked. It was the kind of ordinary, unhurried place that felt almost surreal after 2 nights in a parked car watching a storage facility. "We have enough," Frank said, wrapping both hands around his mug. "The footage, the documents, the shipping schedule. I call Lena right now, we hand this over, and Ryan Carver is in handcuffs by noon." "No," I said. Frank set his mug down. "Daniel, if we arrest Ryan today, what happens to Victor Hale?" Frank opened his mouth, closed it. "Victor walks," I said. "His lawyer argues he was just a transport contact. No direct evidence of prior knowledge case gets complicated. And the man above Victor, whoever built this whole operation and chose Ryan to hold the bag, he disappears completely. Changes his approach, finds someone else, does this again to another person." I turned my coffee mug in my hands. "And Harold Simmons is still sitting in a prison in Sacramento for something he didn't do. And George Patterson in San Diego is still waiting for a trial that will destroy him." Frank studied me across the table for a long moment. Outside on Valley Boulevard, a delivery truck rumbled past, rattling the window in its frame. "You've been thinking about this since the storage unit," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been thinking about it since I heard Emily's voice on that recording," I said. "Ryan built this whole thing around one assumption, that I would come home Saturday, find the police waiting, and react the way a frightened man reacts, loudly, desperately, without a plan." I looked at Frank. I want to give him exactly what he's expecting, right up until the moment he realizes it isn't what he's expecting at all. Frank was quiet for a moment. Carol came by, refilled both mugs without a word, and moved on down the counter. "You want to let the transfer happen," Frank said slowly. "Let him move everything to your house. Let him make the anonymous call. And be ready when he does," I said, "with everything. Not just enough to arrest Ryan, enough to dismantle the whole structure from the foundation up." Frank exhaled through his nose, a long, measured breath that I had learned over the years meant he was running the angles, checking the load-bearing points the way I did on a job site. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Lena," he said. "And Daniel, She's going to have opinions about this. Good, I said. I want someone with opinions. I don't want someone who just agrees with me. Lena Marsh arrived at Rosie's 40 minutes later. She was 42 years old, trim and composed in plain clothes, dark jeans, a gray jacket, her LA County Sheriff's Department credentials folded in her breast pocket. She had the particular quality of stillness that I associated with people who spent their working lives making rapid assessments of situations that could go wrong in multiple directions simultaneously. She shook my hand with a firm, brief grip and slid into the booth across from us and looked at the evidence Frank spread across the table with the focused attention of someone reading a blueprint. She asked precise questions. Not many, but each one landed exactly where it needed to. The footage from outside the storage facility all captured from public right-of-way. Every frame, Frank confirmed. The documents you photographed inside the unit you touched. Nothing removed, nothing. Photographed only. The originals are exactly where we found them. Lena nodded, making a note. And your daughter provided the key voluntarily. She put it in my hand herself, I said. Lena looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down. She had dark eyes that didn't give much away, and the kind of composure that came not from coldness, but from discipline. Mr. Brooks, I want to be honest with you about something. What you're proposing, allowing the transfer to proceed, waiting for the anonymous tip, carries real risk. If anything goes sideways between now and Saturday, if Ryan becomes suspicious and moves the operation, we may lose the window entirely. I understand that, I said. I also want to be clear about something else. She leaned forward slightly. If we do this, everything goes through proper channels. You and Mr. Delgado do not confront anyone. You do not attempt any independent action once this is in motion. The moment the anonymous tip comes in, this becomes an active law enforcement operation, and you step back completely. She held my gaze. Can you commit to that? I thought about Emily's wrists, about the recording, about the way my daughter had pushed her sleeves down in a parking lot on a 68-degree morning. I can commit to that, I said, as long as we get all of them, not just Ryan. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Lena's expression. Not softness, exactly, more like recognition. The look of someone who understands from experience why a person would need to hear that promise made out loud. We build this correctly, she said, and we get all of them. She picked up her coffee. Now, walk me through Saturday. Every detail, from the beginning. Outside on Valley Boulevard, the morning traffic was picking up. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug and felt something settle into place in my chest, the particular steadiness of a man who has found solid ground and is ready to start building. I started talking. Ryan called Saturday morning with the enthusiasm of a man who had no idea he was walking into the last week of his own plan. Friday had passed quietly, Frank and Lena finalizing logistics, me going through the motions of a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to plan. Dad, I've been thinking. His voice had that particular brightness he used when he wanted something warm, generous sounding, the verbal equivalent of a firm handshake. You've got an incredible collection. 40 years of pieces, some of them genuinely museum quality. What if we put together a little gathering at your place, invite some serious collectors, a few investors I know. Let people see what you've built. I was standing at the kitchen counter in the Rose Hill house, coffee in hand, watching a mockingbird work through its repertoire in the oak tree outside the window. I let Ryan talk for another 30 seconds before I responded. That's a generous thought, I said. What kind of timeline were you thinking? Monday evening, I know it's fast, but these things work better when they're intimate, spontaneous. People come because they're curious, not because they feel obligated. A pause. I can handle all the organizing. You just need to be there. I need to be there. I turned that sentence over quietly in my mind. Yes, he absolutely needed me to be there. Monday works, I said. Use whatever you need. After I hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both palms flat against the wood surface and breathed for a full minute. Then I called Frank. Frank arrived at Rose Hill 2 hours later with a man named Rodriguez, a former LAPD tech specialist, who now ran his own private security firm and who Frank had brought in on 3 previous surveillance cases. He was compact efficient, the kind of person who assessed a room for camera angles before he assessed it for anything else. Over the following 6 hours, while Ryan's event planner called to discuss furniture arrangement and catering logistics, Frank and Rodriguez replaced every camera in the house with hardware that recorded in 4K resolution, stored footage simultaneously to a local drive, and an encrypted cloud server, and embedded timestamps that could not be altered without breaking the encryption key. The federal investigator Lena had brought into the operation a quiet man named Garrett from the FBI's Art Crime Division, reviewed the entire setup on Sunday morning and signed off on its evidentiary integrity. Under federal evidence standards, footage captured by a homeowner's security system on his own property with law enforcement oversight was as clean as it got. Every room, every angle, every inch of the basement, especially the area near the false wall. By Sunday afternoon, when Ryan's people arrived to begin setting up tables and arranging lighting, the house was ready in ways they couldn't see. The recording came through Sunday evening, just after 9. A voice message to a number Frank had set up as a secondary contact point. Emily had memorized it the week before during the 2 seconds I had held her hand in the Vaughn's parking lot and told her to call this number if she found anything. She had found something. I sat in the kitchen and pressed play. Ryan's voice first relaxed, slightly lowered the way he talked when he thought no one important was listening. Monday night, I make the call. By the time the cops finish with the basement, everyone at the party will have seen enough to draw their own conclusions. The old man throws a viewing event to find buyers, that's the story. Nobody questions it. Then Victor's voice, smooth and careful. And the documentation holds. Every piece has his signature. His account processed the payments. His passport shows he was meeting suppliers in Europe. A short laugh. It's airtight. Then Victor again. What about your wife? A pause. When Ryan spoke again, his voice had changed, flatter, cooler, the warmth entirely gone. She knows too much to be useful and not enough to be dangerous. Once her father's in custody, she loses her only leverage. Nobody's going to believe a wife who's trying to protect her family. The recording ended. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table. The first time I listened to it, something hot and jagged moved through my chest. The kind of anger that has physical dimensions that you can feel in your back teeth and behind your eyes. I wanted to put my fist through the wall. I wanted to drive to Arcadia and drag Ryan Carver out of my daughter's house by his collar and make absolutely certain he understood in very concrete terms exactly what I thought of him. I played it again. The second time, the anger was still there, but underneath it, something else had opened up, a grief I hadn't let myself feel yet, for the marriage Emily had believed in, for the man she had trusted with her life, for the years she had spent inside a house that was also a trap. My eyes burned. My throat ached around something I wasn't going to let out, because there was no time for it yet, and Emily needed me functional, not broken. I played it a third time. By the third time, the anger and the grief had both settled into something quieter and more durable. Not cold, I want to be clear about that, because cold implies distance, and I was not distant from any of this. But focused, the way a structure becomes focused when all the load is correctly distributed and every joint is seated properly, and the whole thing is ready to bear whatever is placed on top of it. Ryan needed me to be a frightened old man who collected antiques and didn't see it coming. I was a structural engineer with 40 years of experience, 4 days of preparation, and a daughter who had risked everything to hand me the blueprint of his plan. I forwarded the recording to Frank and to Lena with a single line of text, "We have everything we need." Frank's reply came in under 2 minutes, camera system confirmed clean. Federal sign-off in hand. We're set. I looked out the kitchen window at Rose Hill Street, quiet under the Sunday evening light. Tomorrow night, this house would be full of people who had no idea what they were walking into. Neither did Ryan. The call came at 10:47 Sunday night. I was in the Rose Hill kitchen going over the camera layout one final time, with a printed floor plan. Frank had left behind a cup of tea, going cold beside my elbow, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I picked up on the first ring. "Dad?" Emily's voice, barely above a whisper, compressed and urgent the way it sounded when she was trying not to be heard. "Dad, Ryan knows I took the key." My hand tightened around the phone, so hard the case creaked. "Emily, where are you?" "He found the hook where I kept it. He's been asking me about it for the last hour, and I couldn't." A sound in the background. A door. Footsteps. "I can't talk. Don't call this number again. Dad, whatever happens tomorrow night, please don't." The line went dead. I called back immediately. Straight to voicemail, a generic recording. Not Emily's voice, which meant it was a borrowed phone and whoever owned it had already taken it back. I called again, same result. I put the phone down on the counter and pressed both fists against the edge of the granite and stood there with my jaw clenched so tight I could feel it in my temples, forcing myself to think instead of react, because reacting right now without information was exactly what Ryan Carver would want me to do. I called Frank. He answered before the second ring. "Emily called me," I said. "Ryan knows about the key. The call cut off. I can't reach her." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "I'm leaving now. Don't go to the house alone." "I know." "Daniel, do not go to the house alone." "I heard you. Drive faster." I grabbed my keys and my jacket, and I was in the rental car before Frank had finished the sentence, and the drive to Arcadia that normally took 8 minutes took 5.5, because it was nearly 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, and the streets were empty, and I pushed every yellow light I hit without once thinking about whether I should. The house was dark, every window. No porch light, no living room, flicker from a television, no light above the kitchen sink, the way Emily always left on when she was home at night, because she had been afraid of the dark since childhood and never entirely grown out of it. The kitchen light was off. That told me more than the darkness itself. Emily's car was in the driveway. Ryan's truck was not. I put my hand on the hood of Emily's car as I passed it. Cold. She hadn't driven it in hours. Frank pulled up 90 seconds after I did. He was out of the Tahoe before it fully stopped, and the look on his face when he saw the dark house was the look of a man confirming something he had already feared. "Back door," he said. It was unlocked. The kitchen inside was undisturbed, dishes in the drying rack, a half-finished glass of water on the counter, Emily's reading glasses folded beside a library book on the table. Everything that said she had been here and had not left voluntarily. I picked up her reading glasses. My hands were not steady. I set them down carefully because I didn't trust myself to hold them without crushing them. My phone buzzed. "Darlene, I saw something," she said the moment I answered, her voice low and tight, with the effort of staying calm. "About an hour ago, maybe a little more. A black SUV parked in front of the house. Ryan got out, went inside for maybe 10 minutes, then came back out with Emily." A pause. She wasn't walking easily, Daniel. He had his hand on her arm. My vision went sharp at the edges, the way it does when the body decides that whatever is happening is serious enough to dedicate every available resource to it. Did you see where they went? East on Duarte. That's all I could see. Her voice cracked slightly just once. I should have called sooner. I didn't know if I should. I didn't want to make things worse. You didn't make anything worse, I said. You helped. Thank you, Darlene. I ended the call and opened the Find My app on my phone, the same app linked to the AirTag I had pressed into the lining of Emily's bag in the Vaughn's parking lot 4 days ago. The small precaution I had taken, because 40 years of engineering had taught me that the time to build in a safety redundancy is before you need it, not after. The blue dot was moving. No, it had stopped. East of El Monte, south of the 10 freeway near the San Gabriel River. A street called Ramona Boulevard that I didn't recognize. The dot sat perfectly still in the middle of a block that the satellite image showed as mostly vacant lots, and one structure, a single-story building with a collapsed carport and boards over the windows. Frank looked over my shoulder at the screen. He said something under his breath that I won't repeat. I'm calling Lena, he said. Call her in the car, I said. We're already 12 minutes behind. Frank grabbed my arm before I reached the door. Not hard, just enough. Daniel, his voice was very level. You are not going in there ahead of law enforcement. You are going to drive to that address, and you are going to park 2 blocks away, and you are going to wait for Lena. Because if you go in there alone and something goes wrong, you lose Emily, and you lose the case, and everything we have built in the last 4 days falls apart. His grip tightened slightly. Are we clear? Every cell in my body wanted to argue. Every instinct I had as a father, as a man, who had spent 4 days holding himself carefully in check while his daughter lived inside someone else's plan, was screaming at me to move to act, to stop being strategic, and start being a parent. But Emily had said it herself in that parking lot on Thursday morning, her voice cracked and her chin trembling. I was so sure that if you came in angry and unprepared, he would win. We're clear, I said. Make the call. Frank dialed. Lena picked up on the second ring, and I heard Frank say, We have a problem and I need you moving right now. And then we were both in our vehicles and heading east on Duarte Road in the dark, and the blue dot on my phone screen stayed perfectly, terrifyingly still. Lena's voice came through Frank's hands-free. I'm 11 minutes out. Do not approach the structure. 11 minutes. I gripped the steering wheel and watched the road, and counted my own heartbeats, and thought about a little girl who had been afraid of the dark since she was 4 years old, and was somewhere in that darkness right now, and I drove as fast as I legally could, and told myself that 11 minutes was not a long time. It was the longest 11 minutes of my life. Lena arrived with 2 deputies in an unmarked sedan and a patrol unit running dark. No lights, no sirens, just 2 vehicles rolling quietly to a stop on Ramona Boulevard, 2 houses down from the address on my phone screen. I was already there, parked on the opposite side of the street, with Frank's Tahoe behind me. I had been there for 4 minutes that felt like 40. Lena came to my window before she went anywhere near the building. She was in plain clothes, her badge on a lanyard around her neck, her voice low and completely steady. Blue dot still stationary. I turned the phone toward her. The dot hadn't moved in 22 minutes. Stay here, she said. Not a request. Lena. Mr. Brooks. She held my gaze with the kind of absolute certainty that doesn't leave room for negotiation. I understand what you're feeling right now. I need you to trust that the best thing you can do for your daughter in this moment is stay exactly where you are and let us do our job. She paused one beat. Can you do that? I looked at the building. Single-story boards over the windows, the carport on the left side half collapsed under the weight of what looked like years of deferred attention. A faint light leaked around the edge of one of the boards on the right side, not a lamp, something smaller. A flashlight, maybe, or a phone screen. Emily was in there. "Yes," I said. The word cost me more than almost anything I had said in my 60 years. Lena moved away from the window. I watched her and the two deputies approach the building in a wide triangle formation, moving along the shadows at the edges of the property with a practiced efficiency that made it clear this was not the first time any of them had done something like this. Frank had come to stand beside my car. Neither of us spoke. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and watched the building and counted my own breathing the way I used to count rivets on a stress analysis, just to give my hands something to do. The front door opened in under 4 minutes. One of the deputies came out first, and behind him with his wrists in zip ties and his face wearing the particular expression of a man whose confidence has just evaporated completely, came Marcus Webb. He was younger than I had expected, up close, maybe 28 broad through the shoulders, wearing the same black hoodie from the storage unit 2 nights ago. He kept his eyes on the ground as the deputy walked him to the patrol unit, and he didn't say a single word, which told me he had already decided that talking was something he wanted to do somewhere with a lawyer present. Then Lena appeared in the doorway, and behind her Emily. She was walking on her own. That was the first thing I registered, and the relief of it was so physical it felt like something releasing in my chest that had been wound tight for 11 minutes and 44 years simultaneously. She was walking on her own, she was upright, and when she came through the door and her eyes found my car on the street, she moved toward me with the particular urgency of someone who has been holding themselves together through sheer will and is finally close enough to stop. I was out of the car before I made the decision to move. We met on the strip of dead grass between the sidewalk and the street, and when she walked into my arms, she made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not crying exactly, not quite, more like the sound a person makes when they have been braced against something for so long that the sudden absence of it is almost too much to absorb. I held her as tightly as I dared, my hand on the back of her head, the way I used to hold her when she was small and had woken from a nightmare, and I felt her trembling against me, her shoulders, her hands gripping the back of my jacket, her whole body shaking with the effort of letting go of something she had been carrying alone for far too long. "I've got you," I said into her hair. My voice broke on the second word, and I didn't try to fix it. "I've got you. It's okay. I've got you." She pulled back after a moment and looked at my face, and her eyes were red and wet, and her chin was trembling, but behind all of it, something else was there. A steadiness I recognized, because it was the same thing I had seen in the Vaughn's parking lot. The same thing that had made her whisper, "Be smarter than I was," into a recording she had no guarantee I would ever hear. "Did they get Marcus?" she asked. "Yes." "Is Ryan doesn't know anything yet." I cupped her face in both hands the way her mother used to when she needed Emily to hear something clearly. "And we need to keep it that way until tomorrow night. Can you hold on one more day?" She closed her eyes for a moment. A tear ran down her right cheek, and she didn't wipe it away. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts exhausted and resolute, and she said, "I've been holding on for 11 months, Dad. One more day is nothing." I almost smiled. It hurt in the best possible way. Lena appeared at my shoulder. "I need to take Emily's statement and process Mr. Webb," she said quietly. "Emily, I want you to know you are under no legal obligation to contact your husband tonight. You're an adult, and your whereabouts are your own business. My report will document Mr. Webb's arrest and the circumstances of your recovery. What Ryan Carver is told and when is not something my office is required to manage on his behalf. Emily looked at Lena with something that might have been the first genuine relief I had seen on her face since I came home. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was still rough at the edges, but it had stopped shaking. "Don't thank me yet," Lena said. "Thank me tomorrow night when it's finished." She glanced at me. "Get her somewhere safe. Not your house, not her house. Somewhere Ryan has no reason to look." "Darlene," Emily said immediately. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and straightened her spine with a visible effort, pulling herself back together piece by piece the way her mother used to after a hard day. Darlene's. He'd never think to look there. "Good," I said. Frank was already pulling up Darlene's number. I kept my hand on Emily's shoulder as we walked to Frank's car, and I felt her lean into it just slightly, just enough, and I made a quiet promise to myself, the kind you don't say out loud, because saying it out loud would mean acknowledging how close it had come to not being possible. Tomorrow night, this ends. Before I reveal what happened inside that house on Monday night, before Ryan made the move he had been planning for 10 months, and before Daniel was ready for him, drop "ready" in the comments. Because what you're about to hear is the moment this entire story has been building toward. Don't go anywhere. This story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Names, places, and certain details may not reflect reality. If you'd prefer to step away, now is the time. But if you're staying, you won't regret it. I put on a tie for the occasion. Margaret had given it to me 12 years ago, dark navy Italian silk, the kind of tie you wore when something mattered. I stood in front of the bedroom mirror on Monday evening and knotted it carefully and looked at myself for a long moment. 60 years old. Gray at the temples, deeper lines around the eyes than I remembered from my last serious look in a mirror. A man who had spent 4 days building something in secret while pretending everything was ordinary. I straightened the knot and went downstairs. Ryan had transformed my living room. I had to give him credit for the execution. Cocktail tables with white linen candles in glass holders, a bartender he had hired working a station near the window. Soft jazz from a speaker I didn't recognize placed on the bookshelf beside Margaret's watercolor. 63 people by my count moving through the space with wine glasses and quiet conversation. Collectors, investors, a few faces I recognized from the Pasadena antique circuit. People who trusted that what they were looking at was legitimate because the man who had invited them had given them no reason to think otherwise. Ryan found me near the entry and clapped me on the shoulder with the warmth of a man who had just won something he'd been playing for a long time. "You look great, Dad," he said. "Really, this is going to be a wonderful evening." "I think you're right," I said. He steered me toward a group near the fireplace and introduced me as a quiet genius of the private collecting world, a man whose eye for quality had built one of the finest undiscovered collections in Southern California. I smiled and shook hands and answered questions about Prague and the weekend market, where I had found the French pocket watch, and the entire time one part of my mind watching here to prendre mon poisson. Where on the street outside I knew that Lena Marsh and Agent Garrett and 2 additional federal investigators were sitting in vehicles, waiting for 7:15. Frank was already inside, positioned near the back corner of the room, dressed plainly, holding a glass of water, indistinguishable from any of the other guests Ryan had invited. Ryan had never met Frank in person. He had no way to know who he was looking at. At 7-Eleven, Ryan excused himself and stepped toward the hallway. I watched him take out his phone. At 7:14, he came back. His expression hadn't changed, still warm, still. The gracious co-host, still completely in command of the room he was standing in. But I saw him glance once toward the front door, and I understood that he had just made the call. The anonymous tip to LAPD reporting stolen property at this address, requesting immediate response. He thought he had just pulled the trigger on the best plan he had ever made. At 7:15 exactly, headlights swept across the front window. The room noticed before Ryan did, heads turning toward the window, conversations faltering, the bartender pausing mid-pour. Two dark SUVs and a marked sheriff's unit rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Lena Marsh came through the front door with Agent Garrett and two other investigators behind her. Garrett had holding a document that he presented to the room with the calm authority of someone who had done this many times. "Good evening," Garrett said. "We have a federal search warrant for this property. We're going to ask everyone to remain calm and stay where you are for the moment." The room erupted in low, urgent murmuring. Wine glasses found tables. People stepped back from doorways. Ryan moved immediately toward me, not away, which was exactly what I had expected. He put himself beside me and turned to face Garrett, with an expression of perfectly calibrated shock. "What is this?" he said. "What's happening?" Two investigators had already moved past the crowd toward the basement stairs. I heard the sound of tools against drywall, the false wall coming down. Garrett looked at Ryan, then at me. Ryan spoke before I could. He turned to the room with the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed this moment, his voice carrying clearly over the murmuring crowd, pitched to sound like the reluctant truth from a good man in a terrible situation. "I want everyone to know that I had concerns about some of my father-in-law's recent acquisitions," he said. "I tried to raise them privately. I didn't know it had gone this far." 63 people looked at me. I felt the weight of every one of those looks. The confusion, the discomfort, the beginning of something that in a different version of this evening would have become judgment. Ryan stood beside me with his hand on my arm and his expression full of pained reluctance, and I understood that this was the moment he had been building toward for 10 months, this specific moment, in this specific room in front of exactly these people. I reached up and removed his hand from my arm. Then I turned to face the room, and I spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Before this goes any further," I said, "there's something everyone in this room should see." I looked across the heads of 63 guests toward the corner where Frank Delgado was standing with a laptop and a cable connected to the large monitor Ryan had set up for the evening's presentation. Frank met my eyes. He reached for the remote. The screen behind Ryan flickered to life. The first image on the screen was Ryan's truck. Timestamp in the lower right corner, 2:41 in the morning, 11 days ago. The truck pulled through the gate of the SoCal storage facility on Durfee Avenue, followed by a white cargo van and a dark green SUV. The footage was sharp enough that you could read the license plates without squinting. The room went very still. "This recording was captured from a public street," Frank said, from his position beside the monitor, his voice carrying easily through the quiet. "The timestamp and metadata have been verified by federal investigators and cannot be altered." The second clip was inside my basement, the camera footage from the new system Rodriguez had installed, date stamped 4 days ago. Ryan and two men carried wooden crates through the basement and stacked them behind the false wall with the methodical efficiency of people who had done this before. Ryan's face was clear in every frame. Someone in the crowd said quietly but distinctly, "Oh my God." Ryan moved. He crossed the room in 4 strides toward the monitor and reached for the cable connection with both hands. And two things happened simultaneously. Agent Garrett stepped between Ryan and the screen, with a firm hand on his chest, and Frank simply switched the feed to the backup server, which meant that even if Ryan had torn every cable out of the wall, it would have made no difference to anything. "That footage has been manipulated," Ryan said. His voice had lost its warmth entirely. What was underneath it was something harder and less polished. "This is a setup. He did this." He pointed at me across the room. "He's been planning this for weeks." "Mr. Carver," Garrett's voice was quiet and completely unmoved. I'd encourage you not to say anything further without an attorney present. I don't need an attorney. I need people to understand what's actually happening here. Frank pressed play on the audio file. Ryan's voice boomed through the speakers, the same recording from Sunday night, his tone cold and unhurried, walking through exactly how he planned to destroy me, while 63 people stood in my living room and listened. I watched Ryan's face drain of color as his own words filled every corner of the room he had spent weeks preparing. There was nowhere to look, nowhere to go. His own voice was doing what no prosecutor could have done more efficiently. The silence in that room was unlike any silence I had experienced in 60 years of being alive. It had texture and weight. I could hear the candles guttering in their glass holders. I could hear the bartender set down a glass very carefully on the counter. Ryan's face had gone the color of old chalk. That recording was obtained illegally, he said, but the words came out ragged, missing the conviction they needed to do any work. She didn't have the right. California is a two-party consent state, Garrett said, and there was something in the precision of those 6 words that made Ryan close his mouth. Your wife was a party to that conversation. The recording is admissible. Ryan looked around the room. At the investors who had come because he had personally assured them this was a legitimate event. At the collectors who knew my name and were now staring at him instead of at me. At the bartender who was looking at his own shoes. At Frank, who was watching him with the calm patience of a man who had waited a long time for this moment and was in no hurry now that it had arrived. Ryan turned to me. His eyes were the eyes of a man who has just understood that the ground under his feet is not ground at all. You planned this, he said. His voice had dropped to something almost private, meant for me alone. You planned this, I said. I just changed the ending. He took one step toward me and Lena was there immediately, one hand on his arm, her other hand already reaching for the handcuffs on her belt. Ryan didn't pull away. Something had gone out of him in the last 30 seconds, the performance, the calculation, the 10 months of careful architecture, and what was left was just a man in an expensive suit who had run out of moves. Ryan Carver, Lena said, you are under arrest. She began reading him his Miranda rights. The room broke into overlapping conversations, urgent, disbelieving the sound of 63 people trying to process what they had just witnessed. Someone near the back was already on their phone. The 2 collectors I recognized from the Pasadena antique circuit had moved toward each other and were speaking in low, shaken voices. I stopped hearing any of it because the front door opened and Emily walked in. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on the night before she had come straight from Darlene's. I understood with Lena having arranged her arrival for this exact moment. She looked exhausted in the way that people look when they have pushed past exhaustion into something beyond it. Her hair was pulled back, and she had shadows under her eyes, and her hands, I noticed, were completely steady. Ryan saw her from across the room. The deputy was still holding his arm. Lena was still beside him. And Ryan looked at his wife, the woman he had locked in a room the night before. The woman he had been so certain would lose all her leverage the moment I was in handcuffs, and the last thing I saw on his face before he looked away was not anger. It was not defiance. It was the specific, hollowing recognition of a man who understands that the one thing he didn't account for was the one thing that mattered most. Emily crossed the room. She didn't look at Ryan. She walked past him the way you walk past furniture, registering the presence without granting it significance. And she came to stand beside me, and she slipped her hand into mine and gripped it hard, and I gripped back just as hard, and neither of us needed to say a single word about what we were holding on to. Is it over? She asked. Her voice was steady, but the question was raw underneath the way questions are when you have been waiting a very long time to ask them. I looked at Ryan being walked toward the door, his hands behind his back, the Miranda warning still being read into the air beside his ear. "Almost," I said. "One more piece." The room was still unsettled, the particular restless energy of a crowd that has witnessed something it hadn't prepared itself to witness when a woman I had never spoken to stood up from a chair near the back wall. Frank had reached out to her 2 days earlier and arranged for her to be here tonight, though he hadn't told me exactly when she would make herself known. She was small, maybe 5'2", with dark hair cut practically short, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was wearing a plain navy jacket over dark slacks, and she carried a canvas tote bag against her side, with the careful grip of someone transporting something she didn't want jostled. She looked like someone's sensible aunt, who had wandered into the wrong event until you noticed her eyes, which were moving through the room with a quiet, systematic attention that suggested she had been watching everything very carefully for a very long time. Lena noticed her first. "Mrs. Nelson," Lena said. The woman nodded once. "I think now is the right time," she said. Her voice was unhurried, completely certain. I looked at Frank. He gave me the smallest nod he had spoken to her 2 days ago. I understood had told her where to be and when, and something clicked into place in the back of my mind. The storage facility on Durfee Avenue, 2 in the morning, the first night Frank and I had sat in the dark with cold coffee and nothing happening. The office lights still burning at the front of the property. A woman at a desk looking at a monitor. I had seen her and not seen her. I had filed her away as background detail, someone keeping strange hours in an industrial area, and moved on. She had been watching Ryan Carver for 4 months. Pat Nelson had managed the SoCal storage facility on Durfee Avenue for 19 years. She set her tote bag on the nearest cocktail table, removed a laptop and a small external drive, and connected them with the brisk efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades managing a property where things needed to work the first time because there was nobody else to call if they didn't. "I've been saving this since October," she said, opening the laptop and turning the screen toward Garrett. "Every time that black pickup came through my gate after midnight, I pulled the footage and backed it up off-site. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I've managed storage units for 20 years, and I know the difference between someone moving their own belongings and someone who doesn't want to be seen." Garrett pulled his chair closer to the screen. He studied what she was showing him for a full minute without speaking. The footage ran in compressed time. 4 months of late-night arrivals collapsed into minutes. Ryan's truck, the cargo van, Victor Hale's green SUV. Every visit, every license plate, every face. The timestamps ran in the lower corner of each clip with the reliability of a system that had been set up by someone who understood that details mattered and that the time to care about details was before you needed them. "This covers the period from October through 3 weeks ago," Pat said, "before your investigators started their own surveillance." She looked at Garrett steadily. "I believe that closes whatever gap you had." Garrett looked up from the screen. He had the expression of a man who has just watched the last piece of a complicated structure click into its correct position. "Mrs. Nelson," he said, "I'm going to need you to come with me tonight to give a formal statement." "I brought everything already organized," she said, and produced a thumb drive from the front pocket of her jacket. "Dates, times, vehicle descriptions, cross-referenced with your publicly available theft reports. I've been a property manager for 19 years. I do not leave things in disorder." Emily made a sound beside me, half laugh, half exhale, the involuntary noise of someone releasing pressure they have been holding for months. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and her eyes were bright and wet, and she shook her head slowly, like she couldn't quite believe what she was watching. "Who is she?" Emily whispered. "Someone who was paying attention when I wasn't," I said. Across the room in the doorway, where the deputy was waiting, Marcus Webb had been watching the proceedings with the focused attention of a man rapidly reassessing his options. He was 28 years old, and he was smart enough. I could see it in his face to understand that the situation he had walked into tonight was significantly more complete than the one Ryan had described to him when he'd taken the job. He caught Lena's eye. "I want to talk," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands cuffed in front of him were pressed together hard enough that his fingers had gone white at the tips. "I'll tell you everything, Ryan Victor, who gave them the money, all of it. But I want a deal on the table before I say another word." Lena looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Lena. "Get him a phone," Garrett said. "He can call his attorney." I felt Emily's grip on my hand tighten. I looked down at her, and she was looking up at me with an expression that was made of equal parts relief and something I recognized, because her mother had worn it sometimes. The look of someone who has been in a storm for so long that they had quietly stopped believing in the existence of dry land, and are now standing on it, and are not yet entirely sure it will hold. "It's holding," I said, because I knew that was what she needed to hear, even though I hadn't said it out loud before. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. Her whole body let go of something. I felt it the way you feel a building settle into its foundation, a single definitive shift, and then stillness. Outside on Rose Hill, the night was quiet. The candles on the cocktail tables were burning low. Somewhere in the basement, I could hear Garrett's team cataloging everything behind the false wall item by item, each one being returned to the name it actually belonged to. It was not finished yet. But the structure was sound. Frank called at 7 in the morning on Wednesday. I was standing at the kitchen window in Rose Hill with my first cup of coffee, watching a pair of mourning doves work through the seed I had scattered on the back fence, the kind of ordinary morning detail that felt extraordinary after the week I had just lived through. When the phone rang and I saw Frank's name, I picked up immediately. "Victor talked," he said. 3 seconds went by while I absorbed that. "How much?" "Enough to reopen 3 cases and implicate someone we hadn't named yet." A pause. "Can you come in?" Victor Hale had lasted 48 hours before his composure cracked, not because of anything the investigators said to him in the interview room, but because of something that happened outside it. Frank explained it to me across his desk with a cup of coffee going cold between us. Arthur Klein had cut off all contact within 6 hours of Ryan's arrest. No calls, no messages, no communication of any kind through any of the channels he and Victor had used for 4 years. To the outside world, Arthur Klein was a successful commercial real estate broker in Newport Beach, who had no connection to stolen antiques or anyone associated with them. Victor understood immediately what that silence meant. He had seen Arthur Klein do this before, Seaver vanish, rebuild, under a different arrangement, with different people, while the person left holding the evidence served the time. Victor had watched it happen to someone else 3 years ago, and had told himself he was too careful, too valuable, too embedded to be discarded that way. He had been wrong. "He gave us everything," Frank said. "Arthur Klein, the full network, how the money moved, how the property moved, how the replacement paperwork was generated." He slid a photograph across the desk. A man in his early 60s, silver-haired, photographed outside a building in Newport Beach, with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never spent a single night worrying about consequences. Arthur Warren Klein. He's been running variations of this operation for 11 years. He identifies collectors with established reputations and legitimate paper trails, cultivates a connection through a middleman, then uses their identity as a buffer when things get close to law enforcement. I looked at the photograph for a long moment. Arthur Klein looked like someone you'd see at a charity dinner shaking hands with a city councilman, writing a check for a children's hospital wing. "You said 3 cases," I said. Frank opened a second folder. Harold Simmons, 72 years old, Sacramento, convicted in 2021 of receiving stolen property. He maintained his innocence through the entire trial and his appeal was denied 8 months ago. Frank's voice was level, but there was something underneath it, a controlled anger I recognized, because I had been carrying the same thing for a week. The items found in his storage unit match Arthur Klein's known network. Harold Simmons has been sitting in Folsom Prison for 14 months. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. "And the third?" I asked, though I already knew. "George Patterson, San Diego, 68 years old, trial date set for next month. His public defender has been asking for more time to build a case that nobody was giving him the resources to build." I sat with that for a moment. Two men both older than me, both collectors, both caught in the same trap, baited with the same patience, whose names I had known since Frank first mentioned them, but whose reality had just become considerably more concrete. Harold Simmons had been in Folsom Prison for 14 months. He had woken up this morning in a cell and did not yet know that the person sitting in Frank's office in Pasadena had just handed investigators everything needed to walk him out. "What do we need to do?" I asked. Frank looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, something beyond professional satisfaction, something more personal. "Your testimony, the storage footage, Victor's full statement, and Pat Nelson's records together give us enough to file for an emergency appeal in Simmons's case and to move for dismissal in Patterson's." He paused. "The DA's office in Sacramento is already on the phone with our federal investigators. They've been waiting for exactly this kind of corroborating evidence." I nodded slowly. Outside Frank's window, Marengo Avenue was doing what it always did on a Wednesday morning. Delivery trucks, a woman walking a golden retriever, a postal worker moving door to door with his cart. Everything ordinary. Everything entirely unaware of the fact that somewhere in this city, the structure that Arthur Klein had spent 11 years building was coming down floor by floor, and two men who had woken up every morning for over a year carrying something that didn't belong to them were about to be able to put it down. "Make the call," I said. "Whatever they need from me, I'll be there." Frank picked up his phone. The Pasadena courthouse was 3 blocks from the coffee shop where Margaret and I used to go on Saturday mornings when Emily was small. I thought about that as I climbed the front steps on a gray Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the party at Rose Hill. The particular way the light came through those courthouse windows, the smell of old wood and recycled air, the sound of footsteps on polished floors that had absorbed 40 years of other people's most important days. I had been here once before for jury duty in 2019, and I had sat in the jury pool room reading a paperback thriller and thinking about a project deadline. I was thinking about different things today. Frank walked beside me through the security checkpoint. Lena was already inside, standing near the courtroom door, with the composed, watchful posture she seemed to carry everywhere. Emily was with Darlene in the second-floor waiting area. She had given her statement weeks ago during the initial investigation, and Lena had determined her physical presence in the courtroom today was unnecessary. Emily had argued about that for exactly 3 minutes before Darlene had put a hand on her arm and said in the tone of a woman who had outlasted 2 husbands and a homeowners association, "Let the lawyers do the lawyer things, sweetheart." Emily had sat back down. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, not the vast, high-ceilinged chamber of television dramas, but a practical room with good lighting and wooden benches and a witness stand that looked like it had been refinished sometime in the previous decade. Judge Eleanor Grant was already at the bench when we entered. She was in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades presiding over rooms where other people's emotions ran very high. Ryan was already seated at the defense table. I had not seen him since the night of the party, when Lena had walked him out of my living room, with his hands behind his back, and his face wearing that hollowed-out expression I had not been able to fully read. He looked different today, smaller somehow, the way people sometimes do when you encounter them outside the context in which they frightened you. His attorney, a tall man in a charcoal suit, sat beside him with a legal pad covered in handwriting. I sat in the gallery behind Lena. The proceedings moved with the particular efficiency of a hearing where the outcome has already been decided, and what remains is the formal articulation of it. Ryan's attorney presented the plea agreement, 6 counts negotiated with the federal prosecutor and the LA County DA's office over the preceding weeks. Ryan would plead guilty to all 6. Conspiracy to commit fraud, receiving stolen property, forgery and falsification of evidence, identity theft, false imprisonment, domestic violence resulting in injury. Judge Grant read each count aloud in a voice that was neither cold nor warm, simply exact, the way a well-calibrated instrument is exact. She asked Ryan for each count whether he understood the charge and whether he was entering his plea voluntarily. For the first 5, Ryan said guilty in a voice that was controlled and toneless, the voice of someone who had accepted a thing and was now simply getting through the formal acknowledgement of it. Then the prosecutor stood. Your Honor, before the court accepts the plea on count 6, the people would like to enter an exhibit into the record. She approached the bench with a document and a thumb drive, an audio recording relevant to the defendant's conduct and state of mind. Judge Grant examined the document briefly. Proceed. The recording played through the courtroom speaker system, not loudly, but clearly. The acoustics of the room, designed to carry voices to every corner, did their job without effort. The courtroom speakers carried Ryan's voice into every corner of that room. His tone was the same as it had been on Sunday night, relaxed, certain, completely unbothered by the weight of what he was saying. He described destroying my life the way a man describes scheduling a meeting. And when Victor asked about Emily, Ryan's answer landed in the silence like something dropped from a great height. Hearing him dismiss his own wife as a liability in front of a federal judge and a full gallery made the air in that courtroom feel too heavy to breathe. The recording ended. Judge Grant did not react immediately. She removed her reading glasses from her face and set them on the bench in front of her, then with a small, precise movement, and she looked at Ryan Carver for a long moment, with an expression that was not anger. Judges, at this level, had long since moved past the kind of anger that showed but something more durable and more damaging. The expression of someone who has heard everything and understood everything and is now deciding exactly how much weight to give it. Ryan was looking at the defense table. His attorney put one hand briefly on his arm. Ryan didn't move. Mr. Carver, Judge Grant said. Her voice was the same measured tone it had been for the last 40 minutes. On count 6, domestic violence resulting in injury, how do you plead? 4 seconds went by. Ryan's jaw worked once the way jaws do when someone is holding back something that wants to come out and has decided at the last moment that there is no longer any point. Guilty, he said. Judge Grant accepted the plea. She set sentencing for 8 weeks out pending the pre-sentencing investigation report, and noted for the record that the federal charges related to the identity theft and the charitable fraud operation connected to Arthur Klein's network would be handled in a separate proceeding. Then she picked up a second document. The court has also reviewed the petition submitted by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office regarding the standing of one Daniel Robert Brooks in connection with this investigation. She looked up from the document and found me in the gallery, not searchingly as though she had to look, but directly as though she had known exactly where I was sitting the entire time. Mr. Brooks, please stand. I stood. Based on the totality of evidence presented in this matter, Judge Grant said, this court finds that you had no knowing involvement in or benefit from any of the criminal activity described in these proceedings. Your name is hereby formally cleared from all investigative records associated with this case. A pause, brief and deliberate. "You are free to go, Mr. Brooks." I had been standing in courtrooms and boardrooms and job site trailers for 40 years, receiving news of every variety. Projects approved, projects denied, budgets cut, buildings finished. I had learned early that the professional thing, the useful thing, was to receive information with equanimity and respond with clarity. I stood in that courtroom and I pressed my lips together, and I breathed through my nose, and I looked at Judge Grant and said, "Thank you, Your Honor." My voice only broke on the last word. I considered that acceptable. Frank's hand landed on my shoulder from behind a brief, firm pressure that said everything he wasn't going to say out loud in a courtroom. Lena, turning from her position near the aisle, gave me a single nod. The kind of nod that passes between people who have done something difficult together and don't need to say so. I walked out of that courtroom into the hallway, and Emily was standing there. She had come downstairs from the waiting area, Darlene beside her coat, still on, holding 2 cups of coffee from the vending machine down the hall. Emily took one look at my face, and her own face did something complicated and involuntary, the way faces do when relief is too large to be contained by normal expression. And then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around me and pressed her face against my shoulder and cried. Not quietly. Not the careful, controlled tears of someone managing their emotions in a public place. She cried the way people cry when something has been held in for a very long time and the container finally gives. I held her and let her, because some things need to run their full course before they can be finished. Darlene stood a few feet away, holding both coffees, looking at the ceiling with the deliberate attention of someone giving 2 people their moment. After a while, she said without looking down, "The coffee is terrible, but I bought it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands." I laughed. The sound surprised me, genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that comes from a place that hasn't been accessed in a while. Emily pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand, and looked at me with red eyes and the beginning of a smile. "Is it over?" "It's over," I said. She nodded. Then she took one of the terrible coffees from Darlene, wrapped both hands around the cup, and said, "Good, now let's go home." 3 months later, the maple tree in Emily's front yard had gone completely gold. She had found the house in Sierra Madre in late August, a small craftsman bungalow, 6 minutes from Rose Hill, with a front porch wide enough for 2 chairs, and a yard that Sophie had immediately claimed as her personal territory. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. Emily had come through the paperwork the way she came through most difficult things, methodically, without drama, with a quiet determination that I had always recognized as her mother's most durable inheritance. I arrived on a Saturday morning with a cardboard box on the passenger seat. Inside were the things I had been holding since I came home from Europe. The blue knit dress from Prague still in its tissue paper. The stuffed bear, one ear slightly flattened from months on a shelf. And the small wooden box containing the French pocket watch, gold-faced, delicate, keeping perfect time after everything. Emily opened the door before I reached the porch. She was in jeans and a flannel shirt with paint on the cuff. She had been refinishing the bookshelf in the living room, she said. And she had learned that she was not as good at it as she had assumed, which she said with a laugh that went all the way to her eyes. That laugh. I had been waiting 3 months to hear that laugh again. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee while Sophie investigated the box with the focused energy of a 5-year-old who has identified something interesting and intends to understand it completely. She pulled out the stuffed bear, first examined it from several angles, pressed it once against her cheek, and announced that his name was Gerald and that he would be sleeping in her room. Emily caught my eye over Sophie's head and pressed her lips together to keep from smiling too visibly. Then Sophie found the wooden box. "What's in here, Grandpa?" "Open it carefully," I said. She lifted the lid with both hands, the way children handle things they've been told to be careful with, slowly, tongue between teeth, absolute concentration. The watch sat in its velvet bed, the gold case catching the morning light from the kitchen window. "It makes a sound," Sophie said. "It does," I said. "It's been making that sound for a very long time." She held it up to her ear and listened with the expression children get when they discover that the world contains more layers than they previously suspected. Then she handed it back to me with the gravity of someone returning something important. Emily reached across the table and took the watch from my hands and turned it over slowly, and her eyes went bright for a moment. Not with tears, not quite, but with something adjacent to them. The particular feeling of receiving something at exactly the right time, long after you'd stopped expecting it. "You carried this the whole way home," she said. "I knew I'd get here eventually," I said. Sophie had moved on to the dress, holding it against herself, and asking Emily if it was for wearing to school or for special occasions, and Emily was telling her it was for whatever she decided, and outside the kitchen window, the maple tree dropped another gold leaf onto the front lawn. "Grandpa," Sophie said, without looking up from the dress, "are you going on another trip?" Emily looked at me. I looked at my daughter, at the paint on her cuff, at the laugh still sitting in the corners of her eyes, at the home she was building around herself and her daughter, one Saturday morning at a time. I looked at the wooden box open on the table between us. I listened to the watch tick in Emily's hands, steady and unhurried, the same way it had been ticking in a market in Prague while I was deciding to come home early. "I might," I said, "but from now on, I'll always know the way back." Sophie nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went back to the dress. Emily set the watch carefully on the table between us, where we could both hear it. We drank our coffee. The morning came through the windows. Outside, another leaf let go of the maple tree and took its time coming down. People ask me whether watching Ryan lose everything brought me satisfaction. Honestly, no. Family Stories revenge never tastes the way you imagine. What brought me peace was a Saturday morning, a little girl naming a stuffed bear, Gerald, and my daughter, laughing with paint on her sleeve. I spent 60 years building things designed to last, and almost lost my name, my freedom, and my daughter, because I stopped paying attention to what was being built around me. Don't be like me. Don't wait for someone to hand you evidence in the dark before you see what's happening inside your own family. Come home early. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Silence is where these things grow. I believe truth always finds its way to daylight. God put me on that early flight for a reason I couldn't have explained at the time. 4 days changed everything. Family drama revenge is never the point. The people still standing beside you when it's over, that's the point. Family Stories revenge reminds us who we're actually fighting for. Not our pride, not our name, the people we love. If this story moved you, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Family drama. Revenge stories like this one exist because real families face real battles every day. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. A small note. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted to explore what matters most, family truth, and the courage to protect both. If that's not right for you today, no hard feelings. But if you're staying, I'm glad.